Hello, I'm Dashiani Navanayagam, and welcome to the conversation from the BBC World Service, the programme where we speak to two incredible women from all around the world about the extraordinary things they're doing. Today, we're discussing consent, what it means, and how it's taught. My guests are Mette Oyos Messen from Denmark. She's an award winning sexual health educator. And Oladele Ogunmayi from Nigeria. She's the global lead trainer at No Means No Worldwide. Mette, Oladele, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Mette, why did you decide to focus on sexual education?
I've been a teacher at an adult school where the students are 18 plus and typically between sort of 18 and 25, 26. And I was doing student counseling actually. I've been teaching for about 19 years, and the student would come to me and ask me questions about their bodies, feeling ashamed about that and feeling ashamed about not having partner sex experience, and how to communicate during sex and so on. And then at some point I was like, it's a bit silly that I sit and have private conversations with the students when they all have so much in common. So at that point I started doing sexual education, to give the students a space where they could be together and talk about their insecurities and their curiosities, and also for me to add some relevant knowledge and to try to help puncture myths and so on. So it actually started with a need amongst the students, and then I tried to take care of that.
And Oladele, what about you? Why did you get involved in this?
So I've always, got inspired through my own life experiences. Uh, I grew up in a system where women lacked a voice and were told to remain passive. And to also say that I witnessed firsthand how harmful cultural norms and societal expectations can be. Seeing and hearing stories of women and children facing sexual and gender based violence, I just felt a strong calling within me to challenge these toxic norms and work toward creating a world where women can live safely with respect and dignity and also have their voices heard.
You now work at No Means No Worldwide. What sort of work do you do there? Can you describe it for us?
I train women on empowerment self defense skills, where they can use their mental, verbal, and physical skills to defend themselves in the face of an assault. It's just all about empowerment, letting them know that they have the power to defend themselves, letting them know that they have to believe in themselves first, if at all they want to get to safety, and also help them to enhance their communication skills and as well to challenge the patriarchal system.
And Mette, you carry out your work in a folk high school. What exactly is a folk high school?
It's a Danish school tradition that dates back to the middle of 1800 something. And it's a type of, you could say, free education where the students actually come and live, and then they share a life together over a period of time. So it's kind of a boarding school, but not what I think you would associate with a boarding school. It's a boarding school in terms of the frames of the school, but then the students come to learn about life through living a life together, you could say. Um, and what is also characteristic for this type of school is that you don't have any exams, you don't have any fixed curriculum. What I'm obliged to sort of pass on to my students is democratic learning, life education, stuff like that.
So both of you, Oladele and Mette, are teaching consent in different situations, in different environments. But I wondered if we could start by understanding what exactly is consent. Oladele, why don't you start?
So we liken it to what we call FRIES. So FRIES is an acronym that is F, R, I, E, and S to help drive the understanding of everyone who cares to know. And the F stands for freely given. Consent is offered without any form of force, threat, or undue influence. It comes, willingly from that individual. The R stands for reversible. So this is saying that consent can be withdrawn at any point in time. The I, which stands for informed. So this is saying that all the parties involved understand what they are agreeing to do. They understand what is expected of them. It is an informed decision. The E is for enthusiastic. So consent comes with enthusiasm, like I am happy, I am anticipating meeting somebody, I am anticipating hugging somebody, I want to kiss them, right? So it comes from genuine willingness. And then the last one, which is S, means it is specific. So it applies to just a particular activity and not assumed for all activities. If I'm agreeing to kiss you, it does not give you the liberty to want to say you want to have sex with me. I have only agreed to kiss you. We usually tell our participants that, and it becomes very clear to them. And it even happens that some of them have been, indirectly abused because they have no idea of what consent is. But after our clear explanation, comprehensive explanation about what consent is, and then you begin to see some of them say, oh, so actually I've been abused because I did not consent, to what I experienced. But now that I know better, I'll be able to raise my voice, use my voice, communicate what I want, and set my boundaries. So it has effectively helped, those people who attend our programs to set their boundaries and feel respected with dignity.
Mette, how does teaching consent benefit everyone?
When we in Denmark some years ago decided on a consent law instead of the previous law that was sort of defining, sexual interaction in Denmark, a lot of people, including the politicians, thought that it was some kind of contract that you had to sign, and I remember people trying to make fun with, you downloading an app, and then you could sort of sign a contract and then print it out. And consent is not about a contract, because the concept of a contract is that you can't sort of undo it. And as you said before, Oladele, I mean, you can at any time withdraw the consent, right? So I think it has nothing to do with a contract. Consent, I think, is a good idea for everyone. It's going to lead to better sexual meetings with more safety, more trust, more empathy, and also more pleasure if that's what you're looking for.
Oladele, is it still considered taboo to talk about these topics? How open are people to having these conversations?
So when we talk about consent, our program is a dual gender program. When we tell them, for example, that you can withdraw your consent during a sexual intercourse, like at that act, during the action, the woman can say, no, I'm no longer interested in having sex, can withdraw or reverse the consent. And then the men in the room begin to raise eyebrows like, how is that possible? That's not possible. It shouldn't be. So sometimes it sparks up healthy debate between the men and women in the room. But at the end of the day, sometimes it can be very challenging because this man would say, no, it shouldn't be like that. Consent, the definition of consent or the key element of consent should change. The narrative should change. It shouldn't be when, the sexual intercourse is going on and then one party can decide to withdraw, that it should be changed. But with comprehensive learning and, valid examples, we are able to change the mindset of most of these men. And it can be challenging, yet rewarding.
Oladele, you said this thing about narrative, right? I think for me it's also important to underline that in the popular culture that young people in Denmark that they encounter, there's this sort of social sexual script. This is a sociological theory, actually, that we all have sort of internalized scripts of how sex should, occur. And like a standard part of this, narrative script is that, sex is usually sort of heterosexual, and sex ends with the man climaxing or ejaculating. And I see, well, I sometimes speak to students, male heterosexual students, who come to me on a private base and say to me that that they actually ended up having penetration sex without wanting it because they thought they were sort of expected to do that, And I think this is also an important aspect of the consent talk, that you should challenge those sexual narratives.
Meti, I completely agree with you because I want to narrow it down to Nigeria now. In the Nigeria context, and speaking from UNICEF, right? UNICEF reported in 2015 that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys in Nigeria had experienced sexual violence even before the age of 18, right? And narrowing it down to what you said about the consent talk, I believe that consent education, should be in all schools. Teaching consent is like a protective measures for vulnerable populations, such as children, especially.
Oladele, I wanted to ask, what's the most difficult thing you have to overcome? What's the most difficult barrier you have to overcome when you're teaching these classes?
During the class, when we talk about how women, when we talk about consent, right, and telling them about how women should not be judged by the way they dress, and that the way a woman dresses does not call for attention or for sexual assault. And then you see men in the room begin to raise eyebrows that no, she called for it. Why should she be dressed in such a way that, it's revealing? So if a woman dresses in such a way that reveals her body, then it's okay for a man to assault her or harass her or she calls for it. Some even go as far as saying that women should not work late in the night. That if a woman works late in the night, then she's calling for assault. That why should she be working late in the night? So most times it can be challenging to change their orientation because it's something they grew up with. We let them know that abusers are responsible for their actions. They are responsible for the violence that they have perpetrated, and that the victim or the survivor, in a better light, do not call for abuse, and that all the time they should always support survivors.
When you have successfully worked with them and they understand what consent means, do they get resistance from their family or friends who disagree with them?
Yeah, so while some of them come back to give feedback that, they have family members who have disagreed, and then what we do is to reiterate the fact that, we need to create more awareness about, consent, about sexual and gender-based violence. And then there's what we call the Operation CTY, which is Catch Them Young. So this is why we teach our program to children between the ages of 10 to 20 years, so that we are able to achieve generational transformation. And I know that it's going to help create a chain of transformation, because when these young children grow up, they get to teach their children. They also get to teach people around them. So I believe that sooner or later we will get there.
Do you believe that you can ever finish learning about consent? Is it something that you can definitively understand and put into practice?
I usually say to my students that the way I consider this work is that it's a process. It's a lifelong process working with gender, body, and sexuality related stuff. And the best example is that if you have a partner, that you know very well, then you may have like a good way of communicating, and you understand each other. And even then, you should be aware, you can't sort of expect for your partner to always want to have sex because, they wanted it last week. But what I say to them is that if they then have a new partner, they need to start from scratch, So I would rather that they walk out of the door knowing that it's something that they're in process with, rather than becoming sort of experts,
Oladele, I wondered if you've learned anything about yourself that you didn't know through doing this work.
Yes, yes. While I was about to travel for one of my work with No Means No Worldwide, I was pregnant at that time. I was in my second trimester. And then because our work also involves physical skills, at some point I was a bit worried, like, will I be able to cope? Will I be able to do this? But then again, I decided to brace up and believe in myself that yes, I actually can do it. I believe in myself. I know that I am powerful. So at the end of the day, I traveled down to Uganda, in that my state, and I was able to deliver our program effectively, even while pregnant. And the people in the classroom begin to wonder, wow, so this means that a pregnant woman can actually, engage in empowerment self-defense and still feel safe. So I was just so happy that the belief I had in myself helped me trust myself enough to be able to handle that project. And not only that, it also, served as an inspiration and motivation to other women in the room where I taught. It helped them believe in themselves, not necessarily, when they are pregnant, but then they know that if they set their mind to do something, definitely they'll be able to achieve it, because first they believe in themselves. They believe that they have, power, not just the way the society has, seen them to be passive, to be quiet, and, having access to an equal opportunity. It made them know that they have when they set their mind to do something, they are, able to achieve it, with all passion. So I was happy that it was a win-win for myself, and being able to inspire other women, in the space where I taught. So I really learned that about myself, and I'm happy that I made that, decision.
Mede, what about you? Have you learnt anything new about yourself that you didn't know through teaching this?
Tons of things. I've realized that, communities and classrooms, when you are an individual in a community and in a classroom where you feel that someone has your back, that you can share both your insecurities and your curiosities, that you're not sort of alone with the responsibility for succeeding in life, and you're also not alone with the responsibility of not succeeding in life. That was really like a huge recognition. So for me, I mean, I usually say to the students that you can sexually educate yourself through literature, music. You can watch TV series, films, all kinds of things, and I think that's really really wonderful. But I think. And you can also sort of engage in through NGOs and organization works and different things. But I think everyone needs to be there, because sexual education can take place in so many different ways. But the strength of the classroom or the strength of the community, and you as an individual feeling that, oh, I'm not alone. There's a lot of stuff that I have in common with other people. There is some sort of assurance in that, and in that I find very empowering. And I see the students sort of, being empowered because they've been part of this safe community where they could exchange things.
That's great. Do you have any final bits of advice on consent for listeners? Oladele.
Yes, for me, I do, especially for women, knowing that women are mostly on the receiving end of this, sexual and gender-based violence. I just want them, and everyone actually concerned, to know that, they have the right to their voice, they have the right to their boundaries, and also their choices, and that consent is power. That their consent is their power. And it is also a reminder that, your body, your mind, and your life are yours to control. And you should never let anyone silence or diminish your worth, because, you are all powerful, you're beautiful, you are strong, you're fierce, you're courageous. And I know that together we can continue to challenge harmful norms, advocate for our rights, and also create a world where respect and equality are non-negotiable.
Mede, what about you? Do you have any final bits of advice for listeners?
I also want to underline that I think consent is, such an important concept. And I also want to link it to the Me Too revolution and some of this, like the shift in paradigm that we've seen in the world for the past years, the fight for equality. Me Too in Denmark, we see sort of a revolt against sexism, against power abuse, a focus on social justice, all these different things. And to me, consent goes with all this, you know, all the sort of progressive movements that we see. We also see a lot of other tendencies, sort of anti-tendencies and anti-feminism and whatnot in the world at the same time. But there is a shift in paradigm somehow, and I think we need to fight to sort of stay in that. You could say in that flow and that moment. It's something that we should keep fighting for, and it's gonna lead to, you know, more life quality, more empathy, better, you know, meetings, better sexual meetings between people if we get people to understand that.
Thank you very much to both of you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Oladele. It was such a
Thank you,
such a
Maxine.
pleasure to talk to you.
I'm Dashiani Navanayagam, and you've been listening to The Conversation.